Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued. Thereafter the king of the elephants, Gajendra, fixed his mind in his heart with perfect intelligence and chanted a mantra which he had learned in his previous birth as Indrajumna and which he remembered by the grace of Krishna. Please repeat. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued. Thereafter the king of the elephants, Gajendra, fixed his mind in his heart with perfect intelligence and chanted a mantra which he had learned in his previous birth as Indrajumna and which he remembered by the grace of Krishna. Purport. Such remembrance is described in Bhagavad Gita 6.43 and 44. Tatratam buddhi sangyogam labate parvadehikam yatate chatato bhuyah samsiddhau kurunandana purvabhyasena tenaiva hriyate yavasho pisaha. In these verses it is assured that even if a person engaged in devotional service falls down, he is not degraded, but is placed in a position in which he will, in due course of time, remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As explained later, Gajendra was formerly King Indrajumna, and somehow or other, in his next life, he became King of the Elephants. Now Gajendra was in danger, and although he was in a body other than that of a human being, he remembered the stotra he had chanted in his previous life. Yatate chattato bhuya samsiddhau kurunandana. To enable one to achieve perfection, Krishna gives one the chance to remember him again. This is proved here, for although the king of the elephants, Gajendra, was put in danger, this was a chance for him to remember his previous devotional activities, so that he could immediately be rescued by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is imperative, therefore, that all devotees in Krishna consciousness practice chanting some mantra. Certainly one should chant the Hare Krishna mantra, which is the Maha Mantra, or Great Mantra, and also one should practice chanting Chintamani Prakara Sadmasu, or the Nrsimha Stotra, Ito Nrsimhah Parato Nrsimho, Yato Yato Yami Tato Nrsimhah. Every devotee should practice in order to chant some mantra perfectly, so that even though he may be imperfect in spiritual consciousness in this life, in his next life he will not forget Krishna consciousness, even if he becomes an animal. Of course, a devotee should try to perfect his Krishna consciousness in this life, for simply by understanding Krishna and his instructions after giving up this body, one can return home back to Godhead. Even if there is some fall down, practice of Krishna consciousness never goes in vain. For example, Ajamil, in his boyhood, practiced chanting the name Narayan under the direction of his father. But later, in his youth, he fell down and became a drunkard, woman hunter, rogue, and thief. Nonetheless, because of chanting the name of Narayan for the purpose of calling his son, whom he had named Narayan, he became advanced, even though he was involved in sinful activities. Therefore, we should not forget the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra under any circumstance. It will help us in the greatest danger, as we find in the life of Gajendra. Shri Badarayane Ruvacha Ivam Vyavasito Bhutya Samadaya Manorati Jajapa Paramang Japyang Pragjanman Yanushikshitam. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued. Thereafter the king of the elephants, Gajendra, fixed his mind in his heart with perfect intelligence and chanted a mantra which he had learned in his previous birth as Indrajumna and which he remembered by the grace of Krishna. Om Jnana Timarandasya Gyananjana Shalakayam Yakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So prayers are very nice, But prayers are an acquired taste. I remember once Navina Nirada, he was in Sydney, and he was discussing how we read the Krishna book. So we read all the pastimes, then it comes to the prayers, then we skip the prayers, and we go to the next pastime. Now, perhaps as neophyte devotees we may do that, but we should come to the platform of starting to go deeper into the prayers and relishing the prayers. After all, they are one of the 9 processes of devotional service. So this chapter is very nice because it's the prayers of Gajendra. And it's interesting how selfless he has become, that even though he's been attacked by a crocodile, he apologizes for his inability to pray nicely. He's not thinking about, he doesn't go to Krishna, get this crocodile off my leg, ah! No, he says, I cannot offer prayers nicely to you. So this is a nice mood. He's selfless. But it took him 1,000 years to reach this platform. The rest of the time he was trying with his own strength, he was trying to control the material situation. But only when he realized he would be defeated did he finally reawaken his divine consciousness. So this is a lesson that whatever we practice in this life, we keep, and in the next life we'll carry on. Neha bikramo nashasti prachovaya navijati svalpam apyasya dharmasya trayato vijatim. Is that right? Trayate mahato bhayat. That in this endeavor there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on the path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. So there was quite a lot of reading I did at the beginning. There's a few interesting points I noticed. One point I was mentioning how the Lord has contradictory characteristics. It said, Agata Gatana Patiyasi Shakti. He has an energy which is simultaneously makes it possible for impossible things to happen. So the Lord is, by nature, is beyond reasoning. Now there's a statement in the Mahabharata, Achincho kalo ye bhavana tangstakena yojayet. Prakritibhyah param yatscha tadachinchasya lakshanam. That the Achintya realm is beyond material nature and it cannot be approached by logic. It means that in all the arguments and counter-arguments that go on in the name of religion are ultimately futile because it is an experience which is beyond logic. Now, some religions, they will profess an impersonal description of the Lord, and we as Vaishnavas, we accept the personal feature. But actually we accept the impersonal and the personal feature simultaneously. This is one instance of how contradictory characteristics can coexist within the Lord. He's both personal and impersonal. So I was thinking when I was reading the verse, my first thought was this is getting to the essence of the Bhagavat Dharma. Because the verse is all about fixing the mind on Krishna. So we know there's one statement in the Padma Purana which is quoted in Nectar of Devotion. Smartavya satatam Vishnu, Vishmartavyo, najatuchit, sarva vidina sedasyo, retayoreva kinkaraha. One should always remember Krishna and never forget him. And all other rules and regulations are simply to support this. This is actually the Bhagavat Marg. So even all our opulent deity worship is there to support this principle of always remembering Krishna. Revati Nandana Prabhu, he recalls, he once asked Prabhupada, he said, we stay up late at night because we're preaching, so our morning sadhana is very bad. Is this a problem? And Prabhupada replied, he said, no, it is not a problem because preaching is Bhagavat Marg. Therefore, if you do this nicely, there is no loss. He actually then went on to explain, he said, actually the Goswamis have written so much Pancharatrik Vidi because they were criticized by the Smarta Brahmins. So it was kind of written in order to counteract criticism by Smarta Brahmins. Because when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave this movement, he only gave 4 things, essentially. Chanting, feasting, and philosophy. He didn't give a whole system. He didn't write a manual on deity worship. He didn't write so many sanskaras that we should perform. He didn't give all this detail. It came later, the Goswamis, under his order. But actually, as Prabhupada explains in one of his books, he says, Susukam kartam avyayam. This process is joyfully performed. That means danting, chanting, feasting, and desiring to know the truth. These are actually the 4 essential principles of the Bhagavat Marg. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that is what he stands for. In case you didn't know. That's what he stands for, these 4 things. I was also reflecting on the verse on the Bhagavad Gita that begins with the line Tatra tam buddhi samyogam. So that reminds me of another verse. Teshang satata yuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mama piyantiti. To those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So buddhi yoga, it means that one's intelligence is linked with the Supreme. Therefore, one makes the decisions that the Supreme wants one to make. Last time I gave class, Sutta Prabhu asked the question, why was it that Prabhupada left Jhansi after a small fight, whereas with Bombay he kept fighting and fighting and fighting until finally he was victorious? Why did he not give equal endeavor to both projects? I had a look at the Prabhupada Lilamrita. So according to Satsvarup Prabhu, he considered it the will of the Lord. He decided this is not working, this is Krishna's will. So then, if we think about it, if he is on the platform of Buddhi Yoga, then he knows Krishna's desire, right? Buddhi Yoga. His intelligence is linked to Krishna's. Therefore, his decision is correct. Now, when we ask, how does Satsvarup Prabhu know this? Maybe he deduced it, or maybe Prabhupada said it somewhere, I don't know. But anyway, that's what it was. Actually, Vishwambhari is not here today, but he gave me an answer after class, which was very nice, but it was from a scripture that I haven't read, so you have to ask him. But it was something like this. He said that the spiritual platform is called the Vasudeva platform, and on that platform, because one's intelligence is linked to the Supreme, then one's decisions are all in accordance with the desire of Krishna. And sometimes we see acharyas, they differ. They differ in their approach, and sometimes they're criticized, and they're often criticized during their lifetime. But with hindsight, we can see that they were actually guided by their intelligence, which was linked to Krishna. Therefore, Krishna was actually guiding them. So we don't always see who is acharya until later. So it's always dangerous to criticize devotees that may be practicing devotional service in a way that we find strange. We maybe think, oh, that's not what I think is how we should practice devotional service. Well, we have to be careful, because remember it's a namaparad to blaspheme the devotees of the Lord who have dedicated their lives for propagation of the holy names of the Lord. So, these are some considerations. Another point I found quite interesting. Prabhupada says we should practice chanting sub-mantra. It's interesting how he says we should practice it. Now, when you chant Hare Krishna, do you see it as practice? Is that how you view it? Do you think, I'm going to try and do it better today than I did it yesterday? I'm going to practice this mantra. He even says, gives some examples. One should practice chanting Chintamani Prakara Sadmasu, or Nrsimha Stotra. Ito Nrsimha Parato Nrsimha. Yato Yato Yami Tato Nrsimha. So this is an interesting point, that we shouldn't be mechanical in our chanting. That I made up my own analogy, so if you don't like it, I'm sorry. It's like when you have a car doesn't start. What do? You have to push it, and then you turn the ignition, and hopefully, because the car is already moving, the engine starts to run. So chanting of mantra, it is like that. We're not spiritual at first, but we're practicing. But if we keep practicing, then eventually it'll come from within. It'll become spontaneous. So this is the transition from sadhana bhakti to raganuga bhakti. In the 11th canto, there's a statement, bhaktya sanjataya bhaktya, that from bhakti comes bhakti. So we begin, we're like the engine's not working. We're stalled. We're disconnected from Krishna. But we start chanting. Because we have intelligence, we know it's the right thing to do, and we know it will bring a result. And at some point, the engine will actually start to function. And then our devotional service will become spontaneous. But if we simply chant mechanically, then this is called niyamagraha. It is practicing the rules and regulations for the sake of practicing the rules and regulations, not for the sake of making spiritual advancement. So this is very detrimental to our spiritual life. Now, in the Pajavali, there's one nice verse from Pajavali. Before I say this verse, who knows where Prabhupada got the term Krishna consciousness? Actually, it's a translation. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati. So this is a statement from Pajavali. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati. What it means is, well, Bhavita means absorbed, and Mati means intelligence. So when the intelligence is absorbed in Krishna Bhakti Rasa, in love of God, that is Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada has actually explained that he has derived the word Krishna, the words Krishna consciousness from this statement, which is from Pajavali. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavatamati, Kriyatam Yadi Katopi Labite, Tatra Lauyam Apimulyam Ekalam, Janmakoti Sukritaya Nalapyate. The statement is, if Krishna consciousness is available anywhere, it should be purchased at all cost. The only price is greed. It cannot be obtained by crores of births performing pious activities. So we see this is, it's an interesting point that even crores of births of pious activities cannot give us devotional service. Now in the translation, Prabhupada does this all the time. When he translates, he sometimes adds little pieces. So in today's translation, he added a little extra bit. He said, by the grace of Krishna. He said, Indrajumna remembered the Lord, but he adds a little bit, by the grace of Krishna. And if you actually look at the Sanskrit, there's no mention anywhere about grace or Krishna. Shishi Radha Damodar Ki, Shishi Radha Gokulananda Ki Jai. Nowhere will you find the term grace or Krishna in the translation, but you find it, in the verse itself, but you will find it in the translation. And I consider this quite an important point, because we should never think that we have the power to obtain anything at all. Devotional service is simply we try. Now the word grace, can anyone give me some Sanskrit synonyms for the word grace? Kripa, that's a nice one. I actually did a folio search before preparation. I only found, I think it was 3 words for grace. And I expected Kripa to be one of them, but it wasn't. But it was a quick search, so maybe it's there. It would maybe come under mercy, probably. Kripa, yes, that's one. Any other ones? Daya, okay. I never thought of that one. Daya is another one. That wasn't one of them either. Prasad, yes, prasad is often translated as grace. Any other ones? Anugraha, that's grace. Sharma was grace. Another one which wasn't grace, which I thought would be, was anukampa. There's so many words that we use, but they all indicate that we receive mercy or grace. So if we consider the prayers of Lord Brahma, Atapite Deva Padambuja Dvaya Prasada Leshanugrahita Evahi Janati Tatvam Bhagavam Nahimno Nachanya Ekopi Chiranvachanvan. If one receives even a fraction of the mercy or the grace of the Lord, then that person can understand tattva, whereas a supposedly intelligent person, even after a long time, cannot understand. This is Lord Brahma's realization after he thought that he was more clever than Krishna, and then Krishna fooled him. He realized actually mercy is everything. And in the Nectar of Devotion, Svalpapi Ruchireva Shyad Bhakti Tattva Babodikaha. One cannot understand Bhakti Tattva unless one has come to the platform of Ruchi. Please consider this point before you consider going on internet and writing your own Siddhanta. So many people have opinions on so many aspects of our philosophy, and application. But if you're not on the platform of Ruchi, then according to Rupa Goswami, you actually don't understand Bhakti Tattva. So then you may ask, well, why even bother writing? Prabhupada once said that unless you are self-realized, what good is your writing about Krishna? So it's beneficial that we understand our platform and we don't try and be more than what we are, because that is simply a disturbance. So the verse I quoted, it actually had the term prasad and anugraha. So there's also another verse in the same chapter, tattenu kampang sushamikshamano bunjana ivatma kritam vipakam hridvag vapubir vidadan namaste jiveta yo muktipare sadoyabak. One simply engage in devotional service and I patiently await the mercy of the Lord. Anukampa. Also in the third canto there's a statement, Maitreya Rishi, he says, Savai navrita dharmena vasudev anukampaya bhagavat bhakti yogina tirodati shanaya riha. That the false ego is destroyed by navrita dharma, by detachment, vasudeva anukampa, by the mercy of the Lord, and bhagavat bhakti yoga, by performing bhakti yoga. So this is how ego is destroyed. When ego is destroyed, then we become one with Krishna in purpose. And therefore we understand the desire of Krishna. Therefore it is said in the Bhagavad Gita that in order to practice devotional service, one must come to the Brahma Bhuta platform. Brahma Bhuta prasanatmana sochachena kankshati. Was it Sarva Samoham Sarvabhuteshu? Say again? Sama Sarveshu Bhuteshu Madbhaktim Labate Param. By coming to the Brahma Bhuta platform, or becoming free from all designations and seeing everyone equally, then one can actually perform proper devotional service. That is actually the qualification. Or as Prabhupada one time said at least, he said, unless we become one with the Lord, we cannot serve the Lord. So there are some considerations. I thought I'd just close on just a little bit of, I'll do a bit of ascending process of knowledge. Now, Bhakti Yoga is the descending process of knowledge. Ultimately, knowledge comes from above. Acharya Van Purusho Veda. If one follows an Acharya, one has actual knowledge. So all our knowledge is Shabda Brahma. It is pure. It is coming from above, and we receive it. And according to, as I mentioned, this verse from the Mahabharata, Achintya kalo ye bhavana tangs tarkena yojayet, that the Achintya realm cannot be understood by logic. So ultimately the ascending process of knowledge does not work. But it still has some uses. So I'll give you some examples. Now one time I was listening to a lecture by Hridayananda Maharaj, and he gave a little logical argument why the Lord must be personal and must have full consciousness. And it went like this. He said, if we consider lower animals, they have very little consciousness. And if we consider higher animals, they have higher consciousness. If we consider human beings, their consciousness is developed more. And if we consider devotees, their consciousness is developed even more. So we see a progression of consciousness from low living entities to high. So what should be the symptom of someone with the highest living entity? Should that living entity have no consciousness or have higher infinite consciousness? The answer is obvious. It must be infinite consciousness. Because God, He is the supreme entity. Therefore we see a progression from trees to animals to lower grade human beings to higher grade. It must be by logic. The infinite entity must also have consciousness. So I like that argument. I'm not sure if it's found in Scripture, but it's a nice supporting argument. So I was, just to continue this kind of line of thought, I was then thinking, well, what can we deduce about spiritual consciousness? What can we deduce about the absolute realm based on what we know in this realm? So just imagine, for the sake of argument, that we assume that there is a God and that God is all attractive. So based on just only on the knowledge that the God is all attractive, what can we deduce? Now the first thing I thought was, Well, what is more attractive, form or formlessness? What do you reckon? I mean, if I was an artist and I framed a picture and it was just blank, would you want to put that on your wall? Would you pay lots of money for it? Well, if I was a famous artist and I said it was modern art, maybe you would. Okay. Yeah, okay. So someone who prefers abstract art might have a house full of blank paintings. It's possible. So then if you're a very good artist, you can create something that's very attractive. So generally speaking, I think most of us will agree, that form is more attractive than formlessness. Was okay.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, if something is nothing, then attraction repulsion won't, because it's a response.
Mm-hmm.
Stimuli. There's no stimuli, there's no response.
Yes.
But however, form can be ghastly. Form can be repulsive.
Yes.
Maybe I'd rather not have a picture on my wall rather than have that person's picture.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
it may be that
Okay. So to throw in the complication that, okay, it may be the case that form is more attractive than formlessness, but also form is more repulsive than formlessness. So on average, they're pretty much equal, right? Yeah.
Generally, I think for most people, unless you're stuck in a very severe cramped circumstance, like in a prison cell or something, we have choice. So we can reject the repulsive and we can embrace the attractive. So we're not really stuck in that way. And even if our surroundings are repulsive, we can still close our eyes and imagine something beautiful. So this is where meditation comes in. Meditate on the divine form of Krishna, for instance, is associated with activities in any circumstance, either externally or using the senses or internally to meditation and memory. So I think, practically speaking, it is preferable to have form and to,
Mm-hmm.
and to make use of that, to utilize that for our own benefits.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at this from, we've only looked at visual form, let's look at sound. So if you have a sound that has no form, maybe monotonous, then I find monotonous sound to be very monotonous, right? Isn't it? A monotone is very monotonous, it's very boring. But if you take that sound and you start to break it up and you change the pitch, you can create a symphony. Or you can create some nice bhajan. And that's more attractive, right? So in the realm of hearing, at least, we'd have to say that form is more attractive than formlessness. But once again, sound can be ugly as well, of course.
wouldn't you say you could be attracted to form, but generally in formlessness you wouldn't have any sense whatsoever.
You just wouldn't exist.
You might just feel a passive relief from the ghastliness of form that you're repulsed by.
Yeah.
So the thing is, perhaps, we can be attracted to form, but we can't be attracted to form in the same way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Our heart's not going to be, stimulated by absence.
Yes.
But we do feel something before absence in space, isn't it? Like, I just came back from India. It's such a relief not to have a lot of noise.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. So then we seem to be saying then that formlessness is kind of nice because it's the absence of form that we don't like, but it's not the actual positive alternative. And given the choice, okay, let's look at it from another point of view. If formlessness, because there's nothing, there's no variety, then it's not so interesting. Now, I give it the example of which is more interesting. You can watch a movie. I don't watch movies. The last movie I watched was Avatar. That's how long ago I watched a movie. And that was on the aeroplane back from India. Say again? Avatar. Yes, well, Yes, I confess I have watched. Avatar, I didn't find it so attractive. It was quite interesting, but not that interesting. So for 2 hours I can watch a movie, but for 2 hours I wouldn't want to look at a photograph, for example. So this indicates that dynamism is more interesting than something static. Therefore, I can conclude not only does the absolute have form, but it also must be dynamic. There must be activity. Now, if we look at the senses, I like to gratify my senses. Therefore, in the spiritual world, I must be able to gratify my senses. So Krishna, he completely fulfills my senses. Of course, at this time, I don't know anything about Krishna, but I can deduce that in the spiritual world, my senses will be gratified. There will be form. There'll be nice sounds. It will be dynamic. Will it be permanent or will it be temporary? Of course, my conception of the all-attractive condition, it must be eternal, because that's better. Therefore, it must also be eternal. What about emotions? Do I like emotions? Well, emotions are nice, but they're also bad. But if I look at what attracts me, if you want to know what attracts people, you look at what causes them the most trouble when they can't have it. So one of the greatest causes of suicide is broken relationships. Generally, people don't kill themselves when they lose money. Although Prabhupada had to make the point that sometimes when the stock market crashed, people were throwing themselves out of skyscrapers because they lost all their money. But generally speaking, it's not a very sort of common reason for killing yourself. But broken relationships very often is. And why is that? It's because living entities, they get more pleasure out of other living entities than they do from inert objects. Therefore, from this we can conclude that relationship between two conscious living entities is more attractive, and therefore that must also be there in the Supreme. So in so many ways we can come to conclude that the Supreme Realm is, from the emotional perspective, from the sensual perspective, from the dynamic perspective, from the eternal perspective, must be what the boat is. Therefore, to consider to be an impersonalist, then you're actually excluding all those possibilities. And your own experience in this world is that you don't get pleasure from those things. Hare Krishna.